Welcome, Kanwer. I'm really looking forward to this interview because you're talking about something that is just so universal, so core to who we are as humans. And it is so important. And it's something I talk about from a scientific perspective as well. So you're going to talk about love and you're going to give us a wonderful, beautiful perspective on love. And you have a beautiful new book on this book, a book called How to Be Love. And I love that, How to Be Love. And then in brackets, you've got How to Be Loved. There we go.
Yes.
There we go. How to be loved and loved. And the way you approach it is just really beautiful. My audience have heard me talk about the fact that I talk about the science of being wired for love. Mm-hmm. And we literally have every part of our brain and our body is wired for love, being that it's wired to work for us, not against us. It's on our side. So we're wired for success. And that's not just a motivational statement. Literally in our biology, in our genes, in our cells, everything is working towards survival. Mm-hmm. And our mind, brain, body interconnection, the psychoneurobiology is all working towards this love connection. So it's core to our fundamental humanity. And across every culture, across every single movie that we watch, everything is always at the core is love. So I'm so happy to talk about love from your angle today. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's going to be fun. Okay, so tell us a bit about your background, because you didn't start off in this where you are now. You have a great backstory. So tell us a bit of your backstory.
I was born and raised in Toronto, in Canada, and I was working as an elementary school teacher. I loved school so much I didn't want to leave. And
I love that.
I really think it had to do with just, when you're a child, every new school year, new classroom, new desk, new teacher, new environment, new best friend, everything was a whole different experience every time, kind of a renewal. And I really enjoyed that dynamic environment. And I think as I got older and I went to university and I was doing information technology, trying to be a coder, getting into computer sciences, I realized that this wasn't the environment I wanted to be in. And then I switched over to education. I went to teachers college, and then I worked as an educator teaching elementary school. So I taught the 3rd grade and the 4th grade predominantly over the course of 6 years. And I taught in the neighborhood that I grew up in, a very multicultural part of Toronto called Rexdale. And the experiences were really good. And it was my first time as an adult as well. And, having time off after work and not having homework and getting involved in the arts. And I grew up on hip hop, and I grew up on spoken word poetry and going to coffee shops and, using it as an excuse to be social, a way to meet girls, a way to just have fun. But it took a life of its own. And, back then I was writing about things that I thought were super interesting. I was the kind of person that when I learned something, I want to share it. And I'm excited to share it. And a lot of it back then was in the world of social justice and activism. And, once you learn different angles of a situation, I would share that and I would use creativity and spoken word to talk about it. And it took a life of its own. I started sharing stuff, and this is in the early days of YouTube where, you post something on YouTube, people actually saw it. And, it grew an audience very quickly. And I was, still viewing it as a hobby, until eventually opportunities came that motivated me, to quit my job as a teacher to pursue full-time art. And then that's when the fun began, because you learn very quickly that the entertainment industry is not very above board. And the first groups of people to recognize your talent aren't often there to help you. They're there to benefit off your talent and profit off of it. So I found myself in a situation where I actually did not have any opportunities. I was unemployed. I had to quit teaching. And then I also was in a gang of debt. And I was predominantly at that point making music and doing poetry, but I had people I was working with, other friends in creative fields, all of us doing it as part-time hobbies, helping me with the music, helping me with the visuals. And then I couldn't do that anymore because I didn't know how to. And there was a sense of urgency in terms of what can I do? And there was a friend of mine that encouraged me to figure out what I could do all by myself and not depend on anybody else. And at that point, it was just written word. And she encouraged me to write. She goes, write as much as you can. So I began writing every single day. And I now realize that was my cost-effective form of processing and therapy at a time when I couldn't. And I was pretty much writing to myself every day on Facebook. I was blogging back when blogging was a thing. And that connected me with a much larger audience, and it was growing very quickly. And the most predominant comment I was receiving was, it feels like you're telling me my story. most commenters.
Yeah.
You start to realize that we're all in the same boat. We're all dealing with the exact same things.
Mm.
And then eventually, they started encouraging me. It was my community that encouraged me to write a book. And my reply was, I don't know how. And then I was inundated with all these articles on how to self-publish. And I self-published my first book. I crowdfunded it. 305 people contributed to my crowdfunding, and I raised about $25,000. And
That's amazing.
that was the first journey into publishing. And I self-published the book. It did, 3 copies a week for a few years, and then it got to 3 copies a day. And then as other opportunities in my creative career were growing, I got picked up by the biggest bookstore in Canada, which is Indigo, Chapters Indigo.
Mm-hmm.
And once it was put into their retail system, it became a bestseller. And then after that, I connected with literary agents in the States, and I signed with HarperCollins. And then I did 2 more books through them. And now the newest book is with a new relationship with Hay House, who specialize in wellness. And that's kind of the journey of me writing. And I realized that I've kind of cultivated a space where I can be a lifelong learner. And instead of serving or acting as an authority on a topic, I really try to write from the perspective of, I'm the kid at the front of the class, really interested in learning, and here's me sharing my notes with the rest of the world.
I love that. And so when you were blogging and you started off blogging, what were you blogging? You said everyone, it appealed to so many people. What were you blogging about?
So initially, I had a folder full of just really unique photos I had found all over the internet. One that I remember is like a real photograph of a little chimpanzee feeding a baby tiger milk from a bottle.
No.
And then whatever it would inspire from me, I would write.
You'd write about that.
Yeah, I'd write about service. And I think what I really realized very quickly was kind of like the universal experience that we were all having, which was anxiety about tomorrow, regrets about yesterday, and not spending enough time in the present. And I think what I realized, what was bringing things to the table, was my time as a rapper, but also my time as an elementary school teacher allowed me to learn how to package information in nuggets that made it easy to consume. So I wrote as if I was speaking to 8-year-olds, and then you realize you are speaking to 8-year-olds. You're speaking to everybody's inner child. So I wrote a lot about my anxieties. I wrote a lot about my regrets, because at this point I felt like I had really made a mistake quitting my job to pursue arts and not doing my due diligence and understanding this industry at all. And then what I realized is, the metaphor I like to use is that I had left the zoo to live in the jungle, thinking it was absolute freedom, but not realizing all the responsibilities that come with that freedom.
Of living in the jungle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those cages keep you locked in, but they also keep a lot of predators out. And then the moment you're free, you're, and it's been over a decade now. So I've found some comfort in this chaos of the jungle and figured out how to maneuver.
You found your niche. You found your corner. I love that analogy. It's a great analogy. But I'm just going to read a little bit from couple of sections from your book. And you say that the truth is we all want love. Everything we do is in pursuit of it. But as we count likes on social media and measure our worth by the numbers in our bank accounts, we are programmed to see love as something to earn or win. And that programming obscures the simple truth behind what we are, beautiful, infinite, eternal sources of love. And so you've been curious about this for a decade, this whole concept of love and how universal it is. And obviously when you were writing about your experiences, the response you had was kind of loving. People were reaching out to you, and there was community and connection across countries, cultures, belief systems, and everything. So based on that, tell us about this book that you've now just released, and why that title, why the book, why at this stage of your life, and what does it really mean, this concept of love?
Yeah, the book How to Be Loved, it was motivated after a breakup. I was engaged, after 6 months of the engagement and 5 years in the relationship, I walked away from it, not being able to put into words why. And I was always also very cognizant and aware of the fact that my family dynamic and my social circles and friends were much healthier than probably the average person. I have great siblings I get along with. I have great extended family I get along with. I have friends that I've known since I was 5 years old that I've never had any conflicts with. And I still felt this kind of hole. I felt this kind of lack. Like I felt the love, but I didn't feel the gratitude for the love. And I was trying to figure out what was happening. And even in that relationship, it wasn't an unhealthy relationship in any capacity. But it was causing me, I couldn't ignore the anxiety around it. And I was realizing, and this is one of the ideas that, I gathered from some of your work, which is, the anxiety isn't the problem. It's the suppression of the anxiety. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, years later, I now realize I wasn't breaking up with a person. I was breaking up with a version of me that had to exist in that space, because that space
Very
wasn't the
interesting.
safest space to articulate myself or be vulnerable, which I think is an extremely important recipe to
Mm,
developing connection with somebody. So what I realized was I was aware, it's like having a bank account full of money and feeling poor and being like, logically,
mm,
this doesn't make sense. So why do I feel so poor? So I felt love poor, even though it was very clear and abundant, especially meeting other people who have much more dysfunctional family lives. What is this? And I realized it's an internal thing.
mm.
And then I began to start researching, love on a deeper level, understanding that it really is the motivation for everything we do. And then
Yeah.
realizing that there's so many kind of facsimile versions of love that we chase, adoration, attention, affection, clout, success, status. All of these things are, much more quickly gratifying. I kind of view them as fast food.
Mm-hmm.
It's food, it's quick, it's cheap, it's convenient, but it's not really, and it's very delicious, but it's not very nutritious. And I
Mm-hmm.
started realizing that I was falling in that world where I was chasing all this delicious facsimiles of love, that I wasn't absorbing any of the nutrition of the actual love that was existing in my world, because it was much more of a slow burn in terms of gratification. And then I realized, through different journeys, both, plant medicine journeys, through meditation, through, speaking to friends and connecting, that all the walls that I had built up throughout my life to protect myself, emotionally, mostly I realized, this fortress was a prison. This fortress wasn't just protecting me from pain. It was disconnecting me from people. I was, throughout my life, subtly signaled the idea that vulnerability was a weakness.
Mm.
And so, in every step of the way, I would avoid it, including in my interpersonal relationships, where if I was in an intimate relationship with a woman and she expressed pain, it would trigger my pain, and I would want to solve her problem, not because I
Mm-hmm.
cared, but more so because I didn't want to feel my pain that was being triggered. And it took a lot of work to realize that empathy is allowing that pain to get triggered and sitting in the pain with the other person, and then evolving that to attunement, which would be being, not only trying to feel what it is to be in their shoes, but try to be in their skin, and clearly articulate, I know what you're going through. I'm here at your level, and I'm trying to be where you're at. And I was the opposite for the longest time. I was just like, how do I solve your problem? Or if somebody has it worse, or that's not even a problem, that's a dilemma. And not realizing that I was severing connections and
Yeah.
pathways for love to flow, I was just creating blockages. So it's less about finding and realizing and earning and winning love, and it's more about clearing a pathway for love to flow, because love can be in itself a constant energy that is already flowing. And the work that we're really doing is making ourselves available and open to access it.
Oh, I love that. I love that. What are some of us doing wrong then when it comes to love? Because you as you say, the mindset of earning more and achieving more, and as you just described, all the external kind of drivers that are very dominant in our society. There's also at the same time, parallel to that, there is this realization that we need community, we need relationship, we need love. So we almost in an interesting, I think, an interesting state in
Mm-hmm.
time where
Yeah.
we are realizing what you're saying, the love and the community, the relationships, because I interview so many people and it's coming up so much.
Yeah.
And more than maybe 2 years ago when I interviewed people. It's almost every interview, no matter who I interview, it's coming up, this fundamental universal need of humans to connect and deep meaningful relationships and love and community and relationship with the self and that kind of thing. So yet that goes contrary to the hustle culture and the earning and the externalization. It just doesn't satisfy what we need at our core. So based on that, what are most of us potentially doing wrong when it comes to love?
I think what it is, and the subtitle of the book is Simple Truths for Going Easier on Yourself. So I want to preface this by saying, let's be easy on ourselves. And I think, so factually, let's say humans have been civilized, or humans as we know them, as we are, we've probably been in existence, and please correct me if I'm wrong, 40,000 years in this form, maybe a little bit longer, a little bit less.
I'm not sure how. I think that the numbers are debated, but whatever it is, it's a long time.
It's a long time, and we can definitely say for sure what the vast majority of that long time we were all in much smaller communities, and I think focusing on the priority of keeping that community thriving and growing, we adjusted our behaviors accordingly. And I think one of the big things was understanding ourselves in relations to each other. So if you're in a village of 50 to 100 people, you can understand yourself in a hierarchy. So, it's like being in middle school. You can figure out who the coolest kid is. It's 200 people. But then I think what ends up happening is now that we're in these much larger metropolitan cities and societies of millions of people, I think it's really messing up with our wiring, because I think the numbers are really high. So you can't say, might say who's the coolest kid in your middle school, but you can't say who's the coolest kid in Manhattan. It's just, there's too many ladders, and, you climb one ladder and then you find somebody else at the top of a different ladder. So I think what's really happened is a lot of our our biological software to survive these small communities, working within your community, gaining acceptance from your community, ostracism from your community would have probably led to your death. All of this kind of, predisposed software that we are pre-programmed with served us for tens of thousands of years is really kind of working against us when it comes to these big societies. So the paranoia that kept us safe in the jungle from predators, the need to be accepted by everybody that worked in a small village, all of that now, when we don't have physical dangers, is kind of repositioning itself in ways that kind of hinder us. So I think now we prioritize being likable over, honoring our
That's
true
interesting.
selves.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like we choose our self-esteem over our self-respect, and I think it's because of this kind of old software. And I think it's a Peter Crone idea that, you buy your iPhone, it already comes preloaded with software that you can't delete. And it's the same thing with being a human. So I think one of the things that we do wrong is we prioritize being likable, because I think that denies us love so often, because that denies us the ability to set boundaries, show our teeth, stand up for ourselves, be our authentic self. And I think also recognizing when we speak about society, especially on this side, actually taking the time to identify what society is. Society isn't a collection of people anymore. It's, especially in this part of the world, it's a big economic engine. And your contributions to society, it's very clear that you are rewarded for the more you contribute to this economic engine. So it's buy stuff, be happy, work really hard, make a lot of money, be productive. We're no longer, in alignment with the rest of the ecosystem. We're no longer eat, sleep, procreate animals. Now we're almost functioning as machines. How long can we be productive? Whereas every other animal, they sprint, they hunt, they eat, then they sleep, and then they procreate. We don't work in bursts. We don't work in sprints. We're kind of on from 9 to 5. So I think what this kind of society economic engine has done, it has really changed. It's changed our priorities, and that's really mashing up with who we are in terms of our biological software. And what we may or may not realize is everything is designed for that. So when the signals we get through media, when you watch a romantic couple, is you're not watching a healthy romantic couple, you're watching an entertaining romantic couple, which probably by definition can't be healthy. Because I feel, healthy romance, healthy love would feel and look like peace. It would be the equivalence to watching the Fireplace channel on your television, and just watching the flame crackle. It's nice, but it's not going to keep a lot of attention. It's not going to make for a hit Netflix show. So, people watching Friends, and they're watching the cat and mouse game of Ross and Rachel going back and forth. They start to pick up on signals and think that's what it should be. And, and then there's talks about finding the spark with your partner. And I think oftentimes that spark could actually be a warning sign to run the other way. And I think there's that. And I think there's also this kind of understanding that, again, with the messaging, like we have to be sold products. So we have, and one great marketing method is to tell somebody that they're not enough without this product. So now we have this kind of definition of enoughness, which doesn't apply to humans. You can't be enough of a person. You can't be worthy of a person. Enoughness could apply to your bank account when making a purchase. It can apply to your gas tank when taking a trip. But, you can't say something enough of a flower, take off a few petals. It doesn't make that.
I want to just jump in there because it's what you said there about enough. There's a universal, what I'm finding in my research and when I practiced as well, which was for a long time. I practiced for 25 years and I've been in this field for like 35 years now. And that not enough is a consistent, I don't think a single person that I've personally worked with, and then the millions that we now reach, at least probably 90% or 95%, that's come up somewhere in talking about anxiety or depression or just dealing with learning issues or something. That not enough thing is very universal, and it's kind of sad because it's definitely, if you feel like not enough, there's not enough self-love there. And that's something else you also talk about. Because we're also in an era where there's take self-care. We as I said in the beginning, and I sort of set you up, there is a lot of more emphasis now on love and community and all that stuff. But and people are kind of meeting that need by saying, hey, you're busy, but are you taking out time for self-care? And you make a comment that we should look at the difference between self-care and self-love. And I think it relates to this not enough situation, is this I'm not enough kind of situation from from my perception. I'd love your take on that and how you've handled that in your book.
Yeah, I think definitely, and we're having this conversation right around Valentine's Day, and you have these kind of concepts around, self-care, people kind of using self-care and self-love interchangeably. But again, a lot of self-care, self-love includes self-care. Not all self-care includes self-love. And I think it's really important, again, going back to the fact that we're in a capitalistic society where, products and services are constantly purchased. So these ideas of makeovers and spa dates and stuff like that may not necessarily be service and peace which in my opinion are the definitions of love. They may be, again, to enhance you, to make you feel better, or to make you look or seem better than you are. And I think in some of those contexts, you're still playing into this idea. And I think it's really important to realize that, because if you think, especially if we take romantic relationships out of the equation for a moment, think about the people you love. When you think about your family, your parents, your siblings, anybody your best friend, anybody you authentically love, you could write a whole book on their imperfections, and none of those imperfections disqualify them from your love. Because love doesn't require qualification. It doesn't require enoughness. It most definitely does not require perfection, because for love and connection to be established, it requires vulnerability. Someone to be perfect would have nothing to be vulnerable about. And in the book, I make a reference to a YouTube video of Beyonce messing up her performances, 4 minutes of her falling off stage and making mistakes. And just saying the challenge of, if you're a Beyonce fan, watch the video and see if it impacts how you feel about her. And then most likely seeing her be vulnerable will make you love her more.
Exactly. She's still the queen.
She's still the queen, even if she doesn't need to be flawless. Yeah. And because if she was flawless, you would have nothing to connect with her on. She needs to be vulnerable. She needs to be imperfect. And again, but we celebrate this. We watch athletes and we watch them do superhuman things, but we only watch the outcome of their journey. We don't watch them practice.
Exactly.
We don't watch them
and the
take
mistakes.
the same shot. Yeah, and the mistakes, and the greatest athletes in the world. There's that Michael Jordan commercial for Nike where he speaks about how many shots he missed, how many games he lost, and it's a lot, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he is held in such prestige. And I think sometimes it's just we are being, and the reason I say we have to go easy on ourselves is this isn't simply a mistake we're making. It is something that's being signaled to us by our societies, by our algorithms, by our social medias, because there is a lot of money to be made by having people believe they're not enough and they need to buy 17 pairs of shoes. They need to have a bright yellow Lamborghini. They need to fly in a private jet. They need to do all of these things to feel like they're enough, and you cannot address an internal issue with external solutions or antidotes, including another person. And I think it's a really important thing to understand. And as I said, I'm going to keep reiterating the idea that we have to go easy on ourselves, because this isn't a mistake we're made. We're taught this, especially in this part of the world. We're taught this. So it does require a level of unlearning to be like, okay, I was taught that the more money I made, the more symmetrical my face is, the more friends I have. And if I have a blue check mark on Instagram, that I matter. But these things aren't true. And at the end of the day, these businesses that have created this, they're doing it for their own purposes. which is to
Exactly.
keep me on this platform, keep me using it so they have eyeballs for advertisers. And same thing when I watch television or romantic comedies or pornography. All of these things they're hyper normal. You know, they're taking something that's normal and then creating a version of it that is not normal and giving you the impression that it is. And that's why we have reality shows. That's why people shoot pornography with low-level cameras to make it seem more authentic. But what it is these aren't reflections of reality, you know, and it's really important to recognize that. So, you know, a Disney, you know, the old Disney films were taking, you know, the knight in shining armor. You know, that is actually what it used to be in feudal societies, where if your only method of social climbing was to join the military. So it's like you join the military, you can get social climbing. Now your ability to be a little bit more picky or choose a marriage partner will increase. So being the knight in shining armor will get you will increase your mating options. And then to be the damsel in distress, to be chosen by the knight in shining armor. So this served a pragmatic purpose in a small community. And then Disney took it and they amplified it. And now the shining armor is a Gucci belt and the damsel in distress is, you know, certain bodily features or, you know, presenting themselves in certain ways. But at the end of the day, the interesting thing with all of this is what you're thriving for at the end when you think about love is you and your partner sitting on a couch, not needing to say anything, just enjoying each other's company. And that doesn't come from putting your best foot forward on a first date. That doesn't come from, you know, giving the impression and signals that, oh, I'm wealthy. Oh, I'm beautiful. Oh, I'm this, I'm that. All of these things, you know, all of this stuff's going to melt away eventually, hopefully, you know, and the vulnerability is what lasts. And I think this is an opportunity to do so. So I think very often we mistake all these validations for love. And then we start to think that these are the requirements. Because I think, you know, if I meet a woman for the first time and go on a first date, there are going to be expectations and standards that I have to live up to get a second date. But those aren't expectations and standards for love. That's just expectations and standards to get another date, to get another chance, an opportunity to connect with this person. And I think that's because in no other form of our relationships with anybody else or anything else that involves love do we feel all of this condition. And I think that's why it's an important thing to make that differentiation and also challenge the idea that when you are in a romantic situation to begin with vulnerability and understand that vulnerability is not, you know, nothing and then instantly, you know, your deepest, darkest secrets. There can be a lot of vulnerability in between. And, you know, through therapy, I learned to have vulnerable stories that I can share with a stranger that would not scare them away. I can talk about my first dog and losing my first dog and how it broke my heart and how I didn't want to get another dog. And I waited 10 years to get another dog. And now I have a new dog. And there are little reminders of my previous dog through this. And it's a vulnerable story, but it's not too much information. I could tell somebody, I can walk up to somebody on the street and tell them the story. And now there's an opportunity for them to be vulnerable with me versus, you know, me trying to put a best foot forward and just rhyming off my resume and having the person in front of me do the same and hope that creates some level of connection.
I love that. I love how you've explained all of that. It's beautiful. And also the concept of peace and just sitting with your partner on the couch and not having to say anything or do anything fancy is like so important. And people often ask me, because of the line of work I'm in, you know, what is my definition of success and that kind of thing. And when do you know that you're managing your mind and that sort of thing, that the area that I work in, my standard answer is a sense of peace. Because if you have a sense of peace with yourself, that means that there is self-love. It's kind of your signal that there is self-love happening. And the self-care, as you say, they're different. You know, self-love includes self-care, but it's not. How did you explain it? You said it very nicely.
Yeah, I said self-love includes self-care, but not all self-care is self-love.
Yeah, there you go. So some self-care is the things that you're doing because that's what you're supposed to be doing. So I love that definition. So there's nothing wrong with self-care, but you've got to make sure that the self-care is self-love. So it's almost like if I'm hearing you say, you've got to make sure that it is real self-love. Is this what you need for you, or is this something that society says you need for self-care? Because there's so many, like you can go on Instagram and find a million ways to self-care at the moment. You've got to find what works for you that is aligning with self-love and aligning with a sense of peace, which I think is really what you're trying to say. Am I right?
It's all, So at the end of the day, you know, the feelings of love and the feelings of peace is not getting everything. Peace is not needing or wanting anything else. You know, it's you know, in our
being
happiest
satisfied.
moments, it's satisfied. Our happiest
Mm-hmm.
moments are the moments that we just want to freeze. We don't want anything else there. We just want it to last longer. We want it to freeze. We don't require anything else to enhance this moment. And those are moments of peace.
That's beautiful. I mean, I have to interrupt you there. That is such a profound statement, because if that's the moment, if you want to freeze that moment because it's so great, and you don't want it to pass, hang on to that, because that moment is the moment of peace that you want to try and replicate. And in that moment, if you had to have a look at everything going on in your life, there's certainly things that are still needed and wanted and whatever, and all kinds of unresolved issues, but there's something about that moment.
Yeah, and it's presence. It's being present. You know, it's not being in that anxiety of tomorrow. It's not being in that regret of yesterday. It's being today, in the moment, exactly where you are. And that can be in any form. And you start to realize how, you know, again, even that gets monetized. I believe, you know, gambling is a great example of being, is monetizing presence. You know, if somebody is gambling, their mind is not wandering because they're in the presence. So we start to, you know, driving a sports car really fast, having amazing sex. All of these things are taking us, making us, putting us where we are. And I think it's an important thing to recognize, because we also have to start to understand, especially in the world that we live in now, that most of the pleasure that we're chasing isn't enhancing the peace. It's medicating the lack of peace. You know, so we're not even doing things. Yeah, we're not doing things to feel good. We're doing things to feel less bad.
That's very important. Yeah, we're not doing things to feel good. We're doing things to feel less bad. It's medicating using it to medicate. Whereas sitting with that pain may not feel nice, but that is going to lead to a level of acceptance of the uncertainty of life, which does give you peace. Versus, oh, I don't like this feeling, let me suppress it with whatever. And then after the suppression wears off, now you're still sitting with the original issue or issues or whatever that you still need to make peace with. So it's making peace with what you can't, you know, the uncertainties of life and all those issues of life. And
1000%. And I think, you know, and again, it's challenging. And I don't want anyone to you know, to listen to this and have a realization to be like, oh my God, I've been making all these mistakes the whole time. It's like, no, again, we're signaled this. Chatting with a friend yesterday, and they just kept saying, I'm a giver. I'm a giver. My biggest problem is I'm a giver. And I'm like, you're not a giver. You're a people pleaser. Because if you were a giver is someone that is existing in abundance. They have taken care of themselves. You put on their oxygen mask, and now they are helping somebody else. I'm like, the givers that I actually know in my world are the people who are extremely successful in whatever they're doing, and now are looking for opportunities to serve. I'm like, your definition of giver is putting everybody else's needs before your own. And now that's been romanticized. And now you become a martyr. But I'm like, that's not a giver. That's a people pleaser.
That's
and that
so good.
is going to lead to resentment. And you can't have love and resentment in the same room.
Oh, that's very, very important what you've just said, because also that feeling of I'm a giver is met by the current discussion on boundaries. And I'm all for boundaries, but not the way that they've been misunderstood. Then I'm a giver, so now I must put up these boundaries to lock people out. Meanwhile, boundaries there, it's a self-love thing. It is actually what do you need to be able to be the best you so that you can be the best for other people. You know, so it's kind of, there's been a little bit of a distortion of terms. So that's why it's really good that we have these kinds of discussions so that we can all check in on ourselves, because it's so easy to get caught up. I don't know if you're aware of this, but that the up to 95%, this is some of the research that I've done and people in this field of what is going on around us is being absorbed on an unconscious level through our mind, into our brain and body. So it's in our mind, brain, body connection. So there's a ton of stuff that we are just absorbing from our culture, which we all know, but scientifically it's actually happening. It's going in and it's wiring into the mind, brain, body connection. And that's what you were speaking about earlier on. These philosophies, the zeitgeist, the conditioning, these things. And those can, the way I see it, and I'd love your input on this, is that when that happens, that's going to trigger a sense of lack of peace. And it's a major signal that, hey, there's something here that's disturbing me and making me feel a lack of peace. And maybe this hovering, which if you sort of dig down, you'll find hovering anxiety or whatever, and maybe a bit of depression or different emotions and behaviors and so on, that you actually pay attention to that and re-look and see, you know, maybe I'm, without even, you know, if I know that 95% of what I've been exposed to is wiring into me, it's my mind, brain and body are on my side to help me work out when this is something that inside of me that's actually disturbing me as a person and my self-love and so on. So the lack of peace is a great signal to try and identify that. So that's kind of how I've been teaching this, and from my research, I'd love your take on that and how you would see that.
Having a superficial example, going back to the story about my dog, the first dog I had, we put him to sleep at 11 years old. So, he was a big German Shepherd. So that's a full life. But we took him to the vet, put him on the examination table, put him to sleep. It was a heartbreaking moment.
Terrible.
And again, avoided having a dog.
It's terrible.
It is. And then I get my new puppy in April 2021. So this is in the middle of the pandemic. So for the first year to going to the vet, I would drop her off at the front door because it was contactless. And I was still in Toronto. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, things had opened up. And then I take her to the vet in 2022. For the first time, I walk into a veterinary office and then I see that steel table. And instantly I almost vomited. Yeah. And it made me realize, wow, I've been this visual that I haven't seen in over 10 years. There's so much trauma associated with it. And I've been carrying that for 10 years, not knowing.
Wow.
And that was it. And then again, what else is in there? How else do I,
a lot more than we realize.
A lot more, as you said, you're saying 95. I use that for an example because it's like, it took seeing it again to make me realize. I didn't think about it. Like I wasn't anticipating it. And just walking into the room. And again, she was just there to get a vaccine, like a puppy vaccine. So it wasn't a stressful experience at all. And all of a sudden seeing that, and then it instantly made me think, what else is hiding in here? And again, so step one is, first off, try to be aware of or explore through journaling, through sitting quietly, which is people's definition of meditation. See what is there and realize that's still the tip of the iceberg. And there's so much there. And, this is a Michael Singer idea, but it's also Eastern philosophy. Not only, are we limited by these negative experiences, we're also limited by the positive experiences. If we have positive associations for certain things, that creates biases as well, which limits our experiences. And so really the true liberation from this is not only processing the negative stuff, but it's also abandoning the positive. So, and a real world example I use for that is, for people like us who are public figures online, we can't simply disregard the negative comments that we experience, because anybody with a large following will experience those. We also have to recognize their value is the same as the positive. And the positive, these are still people that don't know us, have a limited view. They're in the nosebleed sections of our lives. They have a limited view and they're expressing an opinion. Whether the opinion is something we enjoy hearing or not, it doesn't change that fact. So we can't simply disregard the negative and absorb the positive and think that that's great. It really has to be, my relationship with these comments has to be addressed. So my biases in situations that make me feel good, I have to address that the same way the situations that make me feel bad. Otherwise, they're both going to continually exist
and control you maybe in the wrong way.
Yeah,
or influence you in the wrong way.
And they can influence you in the wrong way. You can have those biases. Somebody has the name of, somebody that you really admire, and then you start to lean towards them a little bit more, or somebody has the name of an ex and you don't want to be around them because they remind you of that. Those are both limiting experiences. And what we need to do is, especially in the world of love, is make efforts to live a bigger life in a bigger world. And that comes just from the...
Yeah, that's a perfect way to end this. Make the effort to live a bigger life in a bigger world. I love that. That's beautiful. And the self-love is a massive part of that, because we can't do that without the self-love.
Yeah.
So do you have that's a great final pearl of wisdom. Is there anything else that you'd like to say just to wrap up this beautiful discussion?
Yeah, I just, as I said, this is, I'm still making all these mistakes. Again, I'm a kid at the front of the class who tried to read as many philosophers, clinical psychologists, poets as much as I could to create this book. And I'm still making the mistakes. I'm not a love guru in any capacity, but I think it's just really, really, really important to understand that none of this is mystical, is secretive. As you read the book, it's going to connect with what already feels right, just as this conversation is. And even people's definition of self-love, whatever you think you need to do to love someone else is the same thing you got to do to yourself. You can hug yourself. You can be intimate with yourself. You can accept yourself as you are. Look at yourself in the mirror and accept what you see in front of you. Express gratitude towards it. The same way that we would love other people. Being vulnerable with yourself can be in the form of journaling. Another great way, irrespective of your religious beliefs, prayer. I think prayer is an authentic moment to express what you actually want and express what you're actually grateful for. And then I think also dancing by yourself, feeling your body. These are all opportunities to become more vulnerable with yourself. My goal is to make it sound simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy. Everything is easier said than done. But again, we're in a society that sells us this dream of convenience and ease, but that really has an impact on our resilience and our peace. And it's okay that it's going to be work. It's okay that it's going to be labor. If you go to the gym and it was an easy day, it probably wasn't a good day at the gym. It's got to be difficult. And let's look at life a little bit that way and know that this economic engine is trying to sell us the idea that everything can and should be easier. But no, it shouldn't. It should be a little bit difficult, because that's how resilience is formed. That's how and I know, seeing another clinical psychologist talk about this, that difficult situations also unlock potentials that you didn't realize existed within you. So let's view that as self-love. Self-love can be doing hard stuff and evolving from it as well.
I love that. That's so important, and it's so real. And there's such a chasm in society at the moment, because what you're saying, everyone in this conversation who's listening to this conversation will relate to it. We know that this is the reality. And there's this chasm between what we know and what we're being told. And so it's to be able to blend the two to create a tremendous conflict in people. So thank you for writing the book and for sharing your wisdom. And this has been a beautiful conversation. I've really enjoyed it. And we'll put all the links to where people can find you in the book in the show notes. And thank you for joining us. And I really loved the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. Likewise.